The blinding white of the maternity ward at St. Jude's Medical Center was supposed to be a canvas for joy. Instead, for Rosalind Blackwood, it became a stage for the ultimate betrayal. While the first cries of her newborn son echoed in the room, another sound cut through the air, the crisp, unapologetic tear of an envelope. Inside were not congratulations, but divorce papers, delivered by her husband's lawyer. As cameras flashed outside her door, this was the moment her gilded life shattered. But they all underestimated her. With the world watching, she picked up a pen, not in defeat, but to sign her name to a war declaration, cleverly disguised as a surrender. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum exhibit on wealth. It was a space of cool marble towering glass and art chosen not for its beauty, but for its escalating value. It was silent, sterile, and suffocating. This was the gilded cage Rosalind Thorne had found herself in after marrying Donovan Blackwood, the formidable CEO of Blackwood Global Holdings. Theirs was a romance that had graced the covers of Forbes and Vogue, the brilliant self-made titan, and the graceful, intelligent art historian from Old Money. It was a merger of power and prestige, a story the world consumed with fervor. But the stories never showed the truth. They never showed the evenings Rosalind spent alone, staring out at the glittering, indifferent skyline of New York City, while Donovan was closing a deal in Tokyo or orchestrating a hostile takeover in London. They never captured the hollow echo in the vast apartment, a space designed for lavish parties that more often hosted only her solitary footsteps. Donovan didn't want a wife. He wanted an asset, an elegant, well-spoken accessory who looked perfect on his arm at galas and could charm the wives of the board members. He admired her pedigree, her poise, and her ability to run their charitable foundation with quiet efficiency, all of which reflected well on the Blackwood brand. He did not, however, seem to value her. Her opinions on his business were dismissed with a condescending pat on the hand. Her desires for a simpler life, perhaps a home in the countryside, away from the relentless churn of the city, were laughed off as naive fantasies. "The empire doesn't sleep, Rosie," he would say, his grey eyes already drifting back to the stock tickers glowing on his phone. "And neither do I." Rosalind had come from a world of quiet wealth, where legacy was measured in generations, not quarterly earnings. Her father, a revered constitutional law professor, had warned her about Donovan. "He's a predator. Rosalind," he had said, his voice laced with a rare note of concern. "Men like that don't build empires. They conquer them, and they burn everything in their path to do it." She had dismissed it as the overprotective worrying of a father seeing his only daughter marry a man so different from himself. She had believed in the Donovan she saw in the beginning, the one who quoted poetry, who remembered her favorite flower, who seemed to see her not just the Thorne family name. That man had vanished almost the moment the wedding rings were slipped on their fingers. He was replaced by the CEO, a man who moved through the world with a chilling sense of purpose, a man for whom everything and everyone was a transaction. The pregnancy had been a surprise, a welcome one for Rosalind, who yearned for a human connection, for a love that wasn't conditional on a rising stock price. She had hoped it would change him, soften the steel that seemed to encase his heart. For a brief time, it seemed to. He was attentive, almost gentle. He placed a hand on her growing belly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. A son. He'd declared, not asked, an heir for the Blackwood dynasty. Her heart had sunk. It wasn't about a child. It was about succession. It was about legacy, his legacy. The baby was just another piece on his corporate chessboard. As the months wore on, even that fleeting attentiveness faded. He became more distant than ever, consumed by the biggest deal of his career, the acquisition of their primary competitor, Vance Industries, run by the shrewd and equally ambitious Gideon Vance. It was a ruthless, bloody battle fought in boardrooms and through press leaks. Donovan was obsessed, working around the clock, his moods swinging violently with the day's market fluctuations. Rosalind's pregnancy became an inconvenience, a distraction from his corporate war. He missed obstetrician appointments. He forgot to come home for dinner on the rare nights he was even in the country. The last conversation they had before she went into labor was an argument. She had found a draft of a press release on his desk, one that detailed the restructuring of Vance Industries post-acquisition. It outlined plans to dissolve the company's charitable wing, a project Gideon Vance's late wife had founded. "You can't do this, Donovan," she'd pleaded. "It funds community centers' arts programs for underprivileged children." He had snatched the papers from her hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "It's a liability, a drain on resources. Sentimentality has no place in a balance sheet. You run your little foundation, Rosalind, and let me run my empire. You don't understand the pressures I'm under." "I understand human decency," she had shot back, her voice trembling. "Decency doesn't get you a controlling interest in a $500 billion market." He'd sneered, turning to leave. "Stay in your lane." That was 2 days ago. 2 days of crushing silence. Now, as the first sharp, undeniable contraction seized her body, she was utterly alone in the cavernous penthouse. She clutched the cool marble of the kitchen island, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at her phone. No missed calls, no texts, just an automated alert from a financial news app, Blackwood Global on the verge of historic Vance Industries takeover. Final vote imminent. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he would not be there. He was at the precipice of his greatest victory, and nothing, not even the birth of his own son, would pull him away from it. With tears of pain and abandonment blurring her vision, Rosalind called her driver, as she was helped into the back of the sleek black car. Another contraction, more powerful than the last, ripped through her. She leaned her head against the cool leather, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. This was not how it was supposed to be. This was not the beautiful shared moment she had dreamed of. This was a solo performance on the stark stage of her husband's ambition. She was just another inconvenience to be managed. But as the car sped through the streets of Manhattan towards St. Jude's, a different feeling began to bloom beneath the pain and the sorrow, a cold, hard resolve. A flicker of the thorn spirit, the one her father always said, was forged in quiet resilience, not bombastic power. She had been a sleeping partner in this marriage for too long, and she was about to wake up. The maternity ward at St. Jude's was an island of frantic calm. Nurses with kind eyes and firm hands moved with practiced efficiency, their soft-soled shoes squeaking on the polished floors. They spoke to Rosalind in soothing tones, monitoring her vitals, coaching her through the escalating waves of pain. But their kindness couldn't fill the cavernous absence beside her. The space where a husband should have been, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, was empty. Her private suite, the finest the hospital offered, felt as lonely as her penthouse. It was a large, tastefully decorated room with a view of the East River, a courtesy extended to one of the hospital's most generous benefactors. The Blackwood name opened every door, but it couldn't conjure the one person she needed. Hours blurred into a grueling rhythm of pain and exhaustion. She had tried to reach Donovan. Her first call went to his voicemail. The second was answered by his curt assistant, who informed her that Mr. Blackwood is in a critical, uninterruptible meeting. "Tell him I'm at the hospital." Rosalind had gasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "Tell him I'm in labor." "I will pass along the message. When there is an opportune moment, Mrs. Blackwood," the assistant, had replied, her voice devoid of any human warmth. An opportune moment. As if the birth of his child was something to be penciled in between a conference call and a market analysis. That was the last she tried. The rejection was a physical blow as sharp as any contraction. Humiliation warred with a primal maternal fury. Her child would not come into this world feeling unwanted. She would be enough. She had to be. The first sign that her private medical event was about to become a public spectacle was a subtle shift in the hospital's atmosphere. The nurses started murmuring to each other in the hallway. A stern-faced hospital administrator appeared, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, "it seems the press has been alerted to your situation. There's a crowd forming at the main entrance." Rosalind's blood ran cold. Who would leak this? And then she knew. It was a classic Donovan Blackwood move. He couldn't control the narrative of his absence, so he would create a different one. The beleaguered CEO, so dedicated to his company and shareholders that he was forced to miss the birth of his heir for a once-in-a-lifetime deal. It was a story of sacrifice, of a titan's difficult choice. It was a lie, but it was a lie that would play well in the financial pages. Soon the muted sounds of the ward were punctuated by the distant but unmistakable clamor of a media frenzy. The flashes of cameras against the windows of the lower floors pulsed like errant lightning. Her delivery room had become the epicenter of a media storm. Just as the doctor announced it was time to push, a different kind of visitor arrived. A man in a flawlessly tailored somber grey suit stepped into the room, flanked by a hospital security guard. He had a severe face, thin lips, and the cold, detached eyes of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. It was Arthur Finch Donovan's chief legal counsel, a man Rosalind had only met at formal events. He carried a sleek leather briefcase. "Arthur," Rosalind breathed, bewildered. "What are you doing here? Is it Donovan? Is something wrong?" The nurses exchanged scandalized looks, and the doctor cleared his throat pointedly. "Sir, this is a delivery room. It is not an appropriate time for visitors." Arthur Finch paid him no mind. He looked directly at Rosalind, his expression unreadable. "My apologies for the intrusion, Mrs. Blackwood. I am here on direct and urgent instruction from my client." He placed the briefcase on a small table, the clicks of the latches echoing unnervingly in the tense room. "Donovan sends his regards." "His regards?" She repeated the words, tasting like ash. A particularly vicious contraction seized her, and she cried out, arching her back. Finch waited impassively for the wave of pain to subside. He showed no empathy, no discomfort. He was merely a courier delivering a package. When she could focus again, he opened the briefcase and slid a thick sheaf of documents out. The top page was stark, the bold black letters screaming at her from across the room. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The air was sucked from the room. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder, a frantic counterpoint to the sudden, deathly silence. A nurse gasped. "Divorce papers," Rosalind whispered the sound, a ragged, broken thing. "He's serving me with divorce papers now. My instructions are to have you sign these immediately." Finch stated his voice, as flat and grey as his suit. He produced a gold-plated fountain pen. "There is a generous settlement outlined within. Mr. Blackwood felt it was best to handle this with expediency, to avoid a prolonged and public unpleasantness." Expediency? Unpleasantness. He was dissolving their marriage, disowning his child at the moment of its birth, and he was framing it as a matter of efficient business. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was an act of such profound, calculated malice that it defied comprehension. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about annihilation. He was erasing her, erasing their child at the most vulnerable moment of her life. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the sweat of her exertion. But through the haze of pain and grief, something inside her snapped. The quiet, accommodating wife Donovan had so carefully cultivated for years died in that instant. In her place, a woman she barely recognized began to rise from the ashes. "Get out!" The doctor ordered, his voice steely with rage. "Security, remove this man now." "Wait," Rosalind said, her voice surprisingly firm. The security guard hesitated. Every eye was on her. She locked gaze with Arthur Finch, the man who had just delivered the death warrant for her old life. "Leave the papers," she commanded. "And the pen." Finch, for the first time, looked momentarily surprised. He placed the documents and the pen on the edge of her bed, giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod, before turning and leaving the room as quietly as he had entered. The doctor looked at her, his expression a mixture of pity and awe. "Rosalind," he said gently, using her first name. "We need to focus. Your son is almost here." She nodded, her vision blurred by tears, but her mind now terrifyingly clear. The pain of betrayal was a fire, and it was burning away all her fear, all her sorrow, leaving only a core of pure, unadulterated strength. He wanted a war. He wanted to destroy her. He had no idea who he was dealing with. With a guttural cry that was equal parts agony and defiance, she began to push. Her son would not be born into a world of defeat. He would be born into a world where his mother was a fighter. The first cry of Theodore Thorne. Blackwood cut through the tension in the room like a clarion call. It was a strong, healthy, furious sound, a protest against the cold, bright world he had been thrust into. A nurse gently placed the crying, squirming baby onto Rosalind's chest. As she looked down at his tiny, wrinkled face, at the tuft of dark hair, so like her own, the maelstrom of emotions within her stilled. The pain, the betrayal, the media circus, waiting outside, it all faded into the background. There was only this new, fierce, all-consuming love. This was her son, her blood, her legacy, and she would protect him with everything she had. For a few precious moments, the world consisted only of the two of them. She kissed his forehead, inhaling the sweet new baby scent, her tears now falling, not from sorrow, but from a love so powerful it was a physical force. He was perfect. He was hers. And he was the reason for what she was about to do. After the nurses had cleaned and swaddled Theodore and the post-delivery chaos had subsided, a fragile peace settled over the room. The doctor gave her a reassuring smile. "You were incredible, Rosalind. Both of you are healthy and strong." She returned the smile, though hers was tinged with a steely resolve. "Thank you, Doctor, for everything." She then turned to the grim-faced hospital administrator, who had been hovering nervously by the door. "I need to ask a favor," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I know the press is still outside. I want you to let one journalist in. Penelope Hayes from the New York Chronicle. No one else. Just her and her photographer." The administrator blanched. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you sure, after what you've just been through?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she stated, her gaze unwavering. "Please, just Ms. Hayes." Penelope Hayes was a name Donovan Blackwood loathed. She was a tenacious, Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist who had spent the better part of a year digging into the more unsavory aspects of Blackwood Global's business practices. She was sharp, fearless, and couldn't be bought or intimidated. She was the perfect person to witness what came next. 20 minutes later, Penelope Hayes entered the room, her expression a careful mixture of professional curiosity and human sympathy. She was a woman in her late 40s with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her photographer lingered discreetly by the door. "Mrs. Blackwood." Penelope began, her voice soft. "Congratulations on the birth of your son. I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." Rosalind offered a small, tired smile, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. "Thank you, Miss Hayes. I asked you here because my husband, as you've no doubt heard, has chosen this particular moment to make a significant announcement about our personal lives. I felt it was only fair that my response be equally public." She shifted, wincing slightly, and reached for the thick stack of divorce papers that Arthur Finch had left. The legal document lay on her bedside table, a venomous snake coiled next to a vase of congratulatory flowers sent by the hospital board. Penelope's eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. "Are those—" "They are," Rosalind confirmed, her voice devoid of any self-pity. "Delivered not 30 minutes before my son was born. My husband is a man who values efficiency above all else." She took the heavy gold pen that Finch had also left behind. The photographer, sensing a pivotal moment, raised his camera, the lens focused on Rosalind. She didn't flinch. She looked directly at Penelope, ensuring the journalist was her witness. "Donovan Blackwood believes he is ending our marriage today," Rosalind said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "He believes he is casting me and his son aside as he solidifies his empire. He thinks this is his victory lap." She uncapped the pen. The click was loud in the quiet room. "He's wrong," she said. With a steady hand, she signed her name on the signature line, Rosalind Thorne Blackwood. The ink was a deep, defiant blue against the stark white paper. The camera flashed, capturing the image the new mother, exhausted, but resolute, her swaddled newborn, sleeping in the bassinet beside her, signing away her marriage. But she wasn't finished. "He thinks this document gives him power," she continued, her gaze burning with intensity. "But he's forgotten about another document. A document he signed a long time ago, which I'm sure his legal team has conveniently overlooked." From a small locked compartment in her designer handbag on the chair, she retrieved a single folded piece of paper, its edges slightly worn. It was not a thick legal document, but something far more personal. She unfolded it carefully. "My husband," she announced, her voice projecting for Penelope's recorder, "seems to operate under the assumption that he holds all the cards, that his company Blackwood Global is his alone to control." She held up the paper for Penelope and the camera to see. It was an addendum written in elegant script on what looked like high-quality stationery. "This," Rosalind declared, "is the matrimonial inheritance clause, an amendment to our prenuptial agreement. My father, a man far wiser than Donovan, ever gave him credit for insisted upon it. Donovan signed it without much thought, dismissing it as the sentimental request of an old man." Penelope leaned forward, her journalistic instincts on high alert. "What does it say?" A ghost of a smile touched Rosalind's lips. "It says that in the event of a divorce, initiated by my husband while I was either pregnant with or in the process of delivering his firstborn biological heir, 51% of his personal controlling shares in Blackwood Global Holdings are to be immediately transferred into an irrevocable trust, a trust for which our newborn son is the sole beneficiary, and I am the sole trustee until he comes of age." The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft whir of the camera's autofocus. Penelope Hayes stared, her mouth slightly agape. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a coup, a palace coup executed from a maternity ward. Rosalind laid the addendum down on top of the signed divorce papers, a symbolic checkmate. Donovan wanted a clean break. He wanted to sever ties. With this signature, she tapped the divorce papers. I have fulfilled his wish. And in doing so, I have just secured our son's future and taken control of his company. Tell your readers that, Miss Hayes, the king is dead. Long live the heir. The story exploded. Penelope Hayes's article, published under the headline, "The CEO's Delivery Room, Divorce Blackwood Betrays, Wife Loses Empire," went viral within an hour. The image of Rosalind, pale and exhausted, but with a fire in her eyes, signing the papers with her newborn son nearby, was plastered across every news site and television screen. The stock market, a notoriously fickle beast that runs on sentiment as much as numbers, reacted instantly. When the opening bell rang on Wall Street the next morning, Blackwood Global Holdings (BGH) stock plummeted. Investors panicked. The narrative Donovan had tried to spin the dedicated CEO, making a hard sacrifice, had been obliterated and replaced by a far more compelling and damning one, the heartless monster, the corporate sociopath. Donovan, fresh off his triumphant acquisition of Vance Industries, found himself in a war room of a very different kind. Instead of celebrating his victory, he was huddled with a team of frantic lawyers, including a shell-shocked Arthur Finch in the BGH boardroom on the 80th floor. "What the hell is the matrimonial inheritance clause?" Donovan roared, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany table. "Why wasn't I alerted to this? Why did you let me sign it?" Arthur Finch, his usual composure shattered, shuffled through a copy of the prenuptial agreement, his face ashen. We flagged it at the time, Donovan. We advised against it. You said it was non-negotiable to appease her father. You called it sentimental drivel and told me to just make it happen. You were more concerned with the clauses protecting your premarital assets. Donovan's memory flashed back to the signing 5 years ago. He remembered Rosalind's father, Professor Alaric Thorne, a man with gentle eyes and a will of iron. The professor had presented the addendum, handwritten on his personal stationery, not as a legal demand, but as a family tradition. He'd spoken of protecting the lineage, ensuring the firstborn was always provided, for framing it in the archaic language of old money and honor. Donovan, eager to finalize the merger of his ambition with the Thorne family's impeccable name, had seen it as a harmless eccentricity. He had barely skimmed the carefully worded text, blinded by his own arrogance. He'd seen Professor Thorne as a relic, an academic who knew nothing of the real world of corporate warfare. He had fatally underestimated him. The clause, which the media quickly dubbed the Thorne Clause, was a masterpiece of legal artistry. It was written not in dense legalese, but in clear, almost literary prose that made its intent undeniable. It was an emotional and legal trap designed to trigger only under the most specific and cruel of circumstances a decent man would never create. It presupposed a level of callousness that only a man like Donovan would be capable of, and it used that very callousness as the mechanism for his downfall. The wording was airtight. By initiating the divorce while she was in labor, he had fulfilled the activation criteria perfectly. His own signature on both the prenup and the divorce petition had sprung the trap. The clause was diabolically brilliant. It didn't just transfer the shares, it put them into an irrevocable trust. This meant Donovan couldn't sue Rosalind to get them back. He couldn't pressure her, buy her out, or intimidate her. The shares no longer belonged to either of them. They belonged to Theodore Thorne Blackwood, an infant, and Rosalind, as sole trustee, had complete and total voting power over those shares until their son turned 25. 51%. It was a controlling interest. She didn't just have a seat at the table, she owned the table, back in her hospital room, which was now guarded by a new security detail, loyal only to her Rosalind, was fielding calls. Not from Donovan, he hadn't dared to contact her directly, but from her own legal team, a firm she had quietly retained months ago in anticipation of a potential battle. She was also speaking to her father. "He thought he was playing chess, Dad," she said into the phone, her voice steady as she rocked Theodore's bassinet with her foot. "He never realized you were the one who designed the board. I simply wrote a contract that rewarded virtue and punished its absence, my dear." Alaric Thorne's calm voice replied from the other end. "Donovan chose his move. I am only sorry that he forced you into a position where you had to enact the consequences. Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," Rosalind said, a new strength resonating in her words. "I'm free, and I have a purpose." Her purpose was becoming clearer by the hour. Board members of BGH were calling their voices a mixture of panic and veiled congratulations. They were businessmen, and they understood power shifts. Donovan's moral failing was secondary to the fact that he had lost control of his own company through sheer hubris. They wanted to know her intentions. "My intention," she told the lead director, a man named Philip Crow, "is to protect the long-term stability and value of this company for its true owner, my son. The current leadership has demonstrated a level of recklessness that is not conducive to that goal. An emergency board meeting will be called." The message was clear. A new regime was coming. Her background wasn't just in art history. Her father had ensured she had a formidable education, including a dual degree in business ethics and finance. She understood balance sheets, as well as she understood Baroque art. Donovan had wanted her to stay in her lane. He never realized her lane was a 6-lane superhighway, and she was about to merge directly into his. She wasn't the trophy wife he had tried to mold. She was Alaric Thorne's daughter, and she had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. Donovan Blackwood didn't become a titan of industry by accepting defeat. He was a cornered predator, and that was when he was most dangerous. After the initial shock wore off, his fury coalesced into a strategy of total war. His first move was to contest the clause's validity in court, filing an emergency injunction to freeze the transfer of shares. His legal team, led by a humiliated Arthur Finch, argued that the Thorne clause was unconscionable, signed under duress, the duress of social pressure to marry, and a violation of public policy. They painted Rosalind as a vindictive schemer who had trapped him. Simultaneously, he launched a vicious smear campaign through media outlets friendly to him. Anonymous sources began leaking stories portraying Rosalind as an unstable gold digger, suggesting she had timed the pregnancy to coincide with the Vance Industries deal. They questioned her fitness as a mother and as a trustee, implying her actions were driven by emotional hysteria, not business acumen. It was a classic playbook. When you can't win on the facts, you attack the person. But Donovan made a critical error. He assumed he was fighting the same quiet, compliant woman he had married. He was not prepared for the lioness who had emerged from that hospital room. Rosalind refused to engage in a public mud-slinging contest. Her response was surgical, strategic, and devastatingly effective. Her first move was to hire a new PR firm, one run by a powerhouse woman known for crisis management. Her second move was to grant a single exclusive television interview, not to a fawning talk show host, but to a hard-hitting financial journalist known for her incisive questions. On-screen Rosalind was the epitome of grace under pressure. She appeared not as a victim, but as a composed, intelligent leader. She didn't speak of her heartbreak. She spoke of fiduciary duty. "My personal feelings regarding my husband's actions are irrelevant," she stated calmly, looking directly into the camera. "My role now is not that of a scorned wife, but as the trustee for the majority shareholder of Blackwood Global." My duty is to protect my son's inheritance from the reckless, impulsive, and ethically questionable leadership that has jeopardized the company's reputation and its stock value." When asked about Donovan's lawsuit, she smiled faintly. "My husband's legal challenges are a desperate attempt to distract from the core issue he willingly signed a contract. At Blackwood Global, he built his reputation on the idea that a man's signature is his bond. It seems he believes that principle applies to everyone but himself. The courts and our shareholders will see this for what it is." Her masterstroke, however, was not in the court of public opinion, but in the corporate boardroom. Before Donovan's injunction could even be heard by a judge, Rosalind used her yet-to-be-contested voting power to call an emergency board meeting. And she came with an unexpected ally: Gideon Vance, the man whose company Donovan had just ruthlessly acquired. The business world was stunned. Why would Gideon Vance, a man who had every reason to hate the Blackwood name, align himself with Rosalind? The answer was simple and brilliant. In a private meeting, Rosalind had made him an offer he couldn't refuse. She didn't offer him his company back. She offered him something better, a chance to reshape the future of the entire industry. Donovan's strategy for Vance Industries was to gut it, Rosalind had explained to Gideon in a secret meeting. He wanted to fire thousands of your employees, dissolve your R&D department, and liquidate your charitable foundations. It was a scorched earth policy designed to eliminate a competitor. I am offering a different path, a merger of equals. I want to integrate your company's innovative culture and loyal workforce into BGH, not destroy it. I want you to join the board of the new Blackwood Vance entity. I need your expertise. Together we can build something stronger and more sustainable than Donovan ever could alone. It was a brilliant gambit. It secured her a powerful, respected ally with intimate knowledge of the company Donovan had just bought. It sent a message to the market that her leadership would be about growth and collaboration, not destruction. And it was a deeply personal blow to Donovan, who saw his greatest conquest siding with his wife. At the emergency board meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Donovan, confident his legal team would tie this up in courts for years, walked in with his signature arrogance. He saw Rosalind seated at the head of the table, his seat with Gideon Vance at her right hand. The other board members, men who had feared Donovan for years now, looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. They were loyal to power, and the power in the room had shifted. Rosalind opened the meeting. "The first item on the agenda," she announced, her voice echoing in the silent room, "is a vote of no confidence in the current CEO, Mr. Donovan Blackwood, citing gross mismanagement of personal and corporate affairs, resulting in catastrophic reputational damage and financial instability." She raised her hand. "As the representative for 51% of the voting shares, I vote aye." Gideon Vance raised his hand. "As a new board member representing the interests of the newly merged Vance Industries, I also vote aye." Or, one by one, the other board members, seeing the undeniable shift in power, followed suit. It was a rout. Donovan sat stone-faced as his entire world crumbled around him, orchestrated by the woman he had dismissed as a mere decoration. He had been surgically and publicly excised from the empire he had built. He stood up, his face a mask of controlled rage. He looked at Rosalind, his eyes promising a war that was far from over. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Rosalind met his gaze without flinching. "I only regret," she said, her voice clear and cold, "that I didn't do it sooner." The fallout was immediate and decisive. The court swiftly dismissed Donovan's injunction, the judge ruling that the Thorn Clause was a clear and binding contractual agreement. Stripped of his title, his power, and his controlling shares, Donovan Blackwood became a pariah. His smear campaign faltered exposed as the pathetic lashing out of a dethroned tyrant. He was left with a vast fortune from his premarital assets, but his name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with hubris and public humiliation. He vanished from the public eye, retreating to a private island to lick his wounds, a king in a gilded exile of his own making. Rosalind, however, didn't revel in his defeat. Her focus was entirely on the future. Taking the helm as chairwoman of the newly rebranded Thorn Vance Holdings, she began a radical transformation of the company. She didn't rule with Donovan's brand of fear and intimidation, but with intelligence, empathy, and a sharp, strategic vision. Her first act was to halt the mass layoffs at Vance Industries, earning the instant loyalty of thousands of employees. She reinstated and expanded the charitable foundations Donovan had planned to dissolve, tying corporate success directly to social responsibility. With Gideon Vance as her CEO, they invested heavily in sustainable technologies and ethical business practices, proving that profitability and decency were not mutually exclusive. The market, once panicked, responded with soaring confidence. Thorn Vance Holdings became a model for a new kind of capitalism. Rosalind moved out of the cold Park Avenue penthouse and into a warm, light-filled brownstone, a true home where Theodore's laughter could echo in the halls. She balanced her demanding role as chairwoman with her even more important role as a mother, proving that a woman's strength was not a zero-sum game. She was building not just a corporate empire, but a legacy of integrity for her son. She was no longer Rosalind Blackwood, the CEO's wife. She was Rosalind Thorn, the woman who had turned the greatest betrayal of her life into a defining triumph, rewriting her story and the story of the company she now led with the stroke of a single defiant pen. 5 years. 5 years had passed since the storm. In that time, Rosalind Thorn had transformed from a symbol of defiance into a paragon of modern leadership. Thorn Vance Holdings was more than just profitable. It was respected. It stood as a testament to the idea that a company's soul did not need to be sold for its stock to soar. The glass-walled headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, once a place of cold ambition, was now filled with a vibrant collaborative energy. Rosalind as chairwoman and Gideon Vance as CEO had forged a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision. They had created something that lasted. Rosalind's life outside the boardroom had found a similar beautiful rhythm. The Park Avenue penthouse was a distant memory, a ghost of a life that belonged to someone else. Her West Village brownstone was a home in every sense of the word, filled with light art that she genuinely loved, and the sound of tiny footsteps. Theodore, or Theo, as he was universally known, was a bright, curious 5-year-old, with his mother's thoughtful eyes, and a boundless energy that was all his own. He knew his father's name, had seen his picture, and understood in the simple way a child does that he lived very far away. Rosalind had decided that honesty tailored for his age was the only path. The full sordid story could wait. For now it was enough that he felt safe, loved and secure in his world, a world his mother had built specifically to protect him. Peace, however, can be a fragile thing. Rosalind knew that a man like Donovan Blackwood did not simply accept defeat. He was not the type to retire to a quiet life of reflection. He was a creature of conquest, and 5 years was a long time to plot a new campaign. She had felt his shadow lingering at the edges of her success, a silent, waiting presence. The first sign of his return was not a thunderclap, but a whisper. It started in the dark corners of the financial world. Obscure online forums and newsletters known for their aggressive short-selling advocacy began publishing hit pieces on Thorn Vance. They were clever, filled with half-truths and insidious misinterpretations of their quarterly reports. They questioned Gideon Vance's leadership. They insinuated that Rosalind's ethical approach was a facade, a ticking time bomb of unprofitability. The attacks were anonymous, but they bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Donovan's style, surgical, relentless, and aimed at creating chaos and doubt. At first, the market dismissed it as noise, but the campaign was well-funded and persistent. The whispers grew louder. A respected, though notoriously cynical television analyst picked up the narrative, giving it a veneer of legitimacy. Thorne Vance's stock, which had enjoyed a steady 5-year climb, began to stutter. It was a subtle erosion, a death by 1,000 cuts. Rosalind and Gideon worked tirelessly to counteract the misinformation, hosting investor calls and increasing their corporate transparency. But it was like fighting a phantom. The source of the funding for the smear campaign was hidden behind a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts. "It's him," Gideon said one evening, as they reviewed yet another manufactured report in her office. The skyline of the city they now helped to shape glittered behind him. "This has all the hallmarks of a Donovan special. He's not trying for a knockout punch. He's trying to poison the well to make us look unstable and bleed us dry fighting ghosts." Rosalind stared out the window, her hand unconsciously twisting the simple gold locket she wore a gift from her father. It's not enough for him. Attacking the company is just the opening salvo. He's testing the defenses. The real attack will be personal. She was right. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped, and it landed with the force of a public bombshell. A courier arrived at the brownstone delivering a legal notice. Donovan Blackwood had formally petitioned the New York family court for joint custody and full visitation rights for his son, Theodore Thorne Blackwood. The legal petition was a work of fiction, so audacious it was almost impressive. It painted Donovan as a repentant father, a man who had spent 5 years in quiet solitude, reflecting on his mistakes and overcoming the immense pressures that had led to his uncharacteristic behavior. He claimed he had reached out numerous times over the years, only to be systematically blocked by a bitter and controlling Rosalind. He wasn't the man who served divorce papers in a delivery room. He was the victim, a father cruelly denied the fundamental right to know his own child. He had even attached a psychiatric evaluation attesting to his profound emotional growth. The media, which had once lionized Rosalind, now smelled the intoxicating scent of a new conflict. The narrative began to shift. Had she gone too far? Was it fair to keep a child from his father, no matter the man's past sins? The trap was as brilliant as the thorn clause itself. If Rosalind fought him, she would be cast as the vindictive ex-wife validating his claims. If she capitulated, she would be handing her son over to a man she knew to be a manipulative sociopath. Her legal team advised a settlement. "We can control the terms," they urged. Supervised visitation, limited hours. It's better than letting a judge decide. But Rosalind knew this wasn't about visitation. It wasn't about Theo. It was about access to the trust. Donovan's plan was clear: insinuate himself into Theo's life, poison him against her, and when the time was right, manipulate his own son into handing back control of the Han Empire. For Donovan, this was simply the longest of long-term investments. She refused to settle. "We will fight this in court," she told her lawyers, "and we will win. But before we do, I am going to meet with him." They protested, but her mind was made up. She sent a single encrypted message through a back channel to Arthur Finch, who to her surprise was still Donovan's counsel. The message was simple: the Met Egyptian Wing, Saturday, 4 p.m., alone. The Egyptian wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a place of silent, imposing history. The towering statues of pharaohs and gods, millennia-old rulers of forgotten empires, provided a fitting backdrop for the meeting. Rosalind arrived first, finding a stone bench near the Temple of Denda. She looked calm, dressed in simple, elegant trousers and a silk blouse, her only armor, the quiet confidence she now wore like a second skin. Donovan arrived precisely at 4. The 5 years had changed him, but not in the way his petition claimed. He was leaner, his face harder, the silver at his temples more pronounced. He looked not reformed, but honed, sharpened by years of resentment. He approached her not with the humility of a penitent, but with the coiled energy of a predator. "Rosalind," he said, his voice a low purr that once would have sent a shiver down her spine. Now it left her cold. "You look well. Power agrees with you." "It's not power, Donovan. It's responsibility," she countered, not bothering to stand. "Something you still seem to know very little about." He gave a dry chuckle and sat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between them. Always so direct. I've missed that. He gestured around the grand hall. I thought this was an interesting choice of venue. All these forgotten kings surrounded by the treasures they amassed, a reminder that all empires eventually fall. "Some are simply transferred to more competent rulers," she replied smoothly. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. Why are you doing this? You don't want to be a father. You've never wanted to be one." "People change," he said, the lie slipping easily from his lips. 5 years is a long time. A man starts to think about what really matters. Legacy. Blood. A son. You had a son 5 years ago. She shot back her voice, cutting through the quiet air. You had a chance to be a father, and you chose to send a lawyer with divorce papers instead. You don't care about Theo. You care about what he represents, 51%. He stared at her, the mask of the reformed man, slipping, revealing the cold, calculating fury beneath. "He is my son. My blood. He is a Blackwood. And you have spent 5 years turning him into a thorn. That is an injustice I will not allow to stand. He is a happy, kind, and brilliant little boy who is growing up free of your poison," Rosalind said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You see him as a pawn, a tool to reclaim what you lost. I see him as my son, and I will burn down the world to protect him from you." Finally, the truth came out. His eyes narrowed. "You can't protect him forever. I will get visitation, and I will be a part of his life. I will teach him what it means to be a Blackwood. I will teach him about power, about winning. And one day he will understand who the strong one was and who the weak one was. He will choose me, and he will give me back what is mine." Rosalind stood up, looking down at the man who had become a stranger to her, a ghost haunting a life she had long since left behind. A wave of pity, cold and sharp, washed over her. He hadn't grown. He hadn't changed. He was still trapped in the same gilded cage of his own ambition, rattling the bars and screaming at a world that had moved on without him. "That's the difference between you and me, Donovan," she said, her voice filled not with anger, but with a profound, final finality. "You think winning is about taking things from other people. I've learned that it's about building things that last. You look at our son and see a key to a vault. I look at him and I see the future, and you will have no part in it." She looked him in the eye one last time. "Withdraw the petition. Disappear. Because if you force me to fight you in court, I won't just defeat you. I will dismantle you. I have every email, every leaked document from your smear campaign, every shell corporation traced back to you. I will expose you so thoroughly that the only legacy you'll have left is a cautionary tale in a business school textbook. Your son will read about you one day, and he will be ashamed. Is that the legacy you want?" He sat there speechless, as she turned and walked away. Her footsteps echoed on the stone floor, the sound of a queen leaving a fallen king to crumble among the ruins of his own forgotten empire. He was no longer a threat. He was just a ghost, and she was no longer afraid of him. Rosalind Thorne's story isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a powerful testament to inner strength and the incredible resilience of a mother's love. She took a moment of devastating betrayal and transformed it into an act of liberation, not just for herself, but for thousands of employees, reshaping a corporate giant in her own image of integrity and strength. Her journey reminds us that the quietest people often have the most formidable resolve, and that true power isn't about crushing your enemies, but about building a better future from the wreckage they leave behind. What did you think of Rosalind's ultimate checkmate? If her story of courage and brilliant strategy captivated you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who loves a story of triumph against the odds, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you breathless. Comment below with your favorite moment.